What is going on, everybody? You are probably wondering why it's not a full house tonight. It's because it's the Young Bucks of the show. It's got myself and Gage tonight for another episode of the 5280 podcast. Mike and Glenn have some other engagements, if you will. I mean, they're letting us take over, which is really nice, by the way. I mean, the fact that you and I can actually have a decent conversation, and don't really rely too much on, Glenn and Mike. It's going to be really nice for a change. You know what, Gage?
Yeah, it's going to be a really nice, fun little shakeup, man. I'm looking forward to it with some youth movement here on the 5280 podcast. I'm really, really excited.
Yeah. So obviously we will roll some of the Broncos conversation, into what we will certainly be talking about. But I'd say a fair amount of our conversation is going to be, to a certain extent, a carbon copy of what we had last week as far as an episode of mainly. And we'll talk about the playoffs. We'll talk about the playoffs just in general, as far as some really strong takeaways, from that weekend, and in particular, setting up championship weekend. And we'll probably talk a little bit about some coaching carousel, of course, and some of the news that may be unfolding maybe rather quickly, or who knows in terms of the Harbaugh saga. Broncos fans certainly know that all that too well in terms of last year, right? Because it has the possibility to linger because it's Jim Harbaugh. So we'll talk about the coaching carousel, and then we'll dip a little bit more into the championship weekend and get a chance to maybe talk a little bit about what are maybe our favorite Super Bowl matchups possibly could be. So I'm really looking forward to this, Gage.
100%, man. 100%. I apologize for I keep looking over. My cat is looking to jump on my desk, and he's probably getting ready to any second. He is. Yep, he's looking for food. He wants more wet food, which I don't have at the moment. Sorry, dude. I have to go to the store and get some. But yeah, man, I'm excited. Let's just jump straight into, I guess, championship weekend.
Well, first things first, I'm going to get it right out of the way. Gage, you don't have to talk about it real quick, but I just want to say congratulations to Todd Helton, the Mr. Rocky, for making it into the Pro Baseball Hall of Fame down there in Cooperstown. I just want to say congratulations to Todd. It was just announced today that he made it into the Hall of Fame. So congratulations to Todd Helton, who, by the way, in some shape or form, is attached to the Denver Broncos, because you know why? Because Todd Helton was a teammate of Peyton Manning, and many actually speculate and believe that Todd Helton was a reason, or maybe the main reason, depending on who you ask, why he is a Denver Broncos. So again, congratulations to Todd. We aren't going to talk about too much of the Rockies, of course, but again, congratulations to Todd and his enshrinement into Cooperstown. All right, let's.
I was embarrassed to admit in our group chat, I had to look up who Todd Helton was. I didn't grow up in Denver. I'm a Broncos fan. I bleed orange and blue. I kind of adopted the Nuggets, but when it comes to Avs and Rockies, I just do not. I can name one active Rockies player right now, and that is Charlie Blackmon. That's it. So, right, I mean, I had to look up who Todd Helton was, but once I realized his history and connection with Peyton Manning, the University of Tennessee, I'm like, okay, this guy, and what all of his accomplishments for the Colorado Rockies, as much as I don't like to acknowledge them as a professional sports franchise, he was, I guess, a contributor of the glory days of that franchise, so I have to give it to him for that. But when it comes to Rockies history, yeah, you got to ask someone else about that one.
And this is, by the way, to anybody, it's true. He misspelled Nolan Arenado. So like, it's actually, so like when he misspelled Nolan Arenado in our group chat, I think that pretty much confirmed it for me. I was like, okay, yeah, this guy, has been following the Rockies as much as, myself, of course. All right, let's dive into the playoff weekend. That was divisional weekend and the finality of divisional weekend. I know for myself, I was praying and hoping that we would at least get 2 straight weekends, Gage, where I didn't have any rooting interest. Like I don't want any rooting interest, to where I'm actually, have to be like forced to root for a team. Now, because the stinking Chiefs advanced and they beat the Buffalo Bills, we finally not only are going to have a Buffalo Bills conversation, but an NFL script conversation about the Kansas City Chiefs, back into the, into the AFC Championship. But of course, I have to root for the Baltimore Ravens because I don't want the Kansas City Chiefs, the stinking Kansas City Chiefs, to get to another Super Bowl. So let's start first with that one. And of course, the big blunder, of course, and it didn't maybe have a big impact necessarily as far as the game, in terms of like the game itself, but in terms of a coaching blunder, that was about as big of a blunder as you could possibly, even see or imagine, with Sean McDermott faking a punt on his own 30-yard line.
Mm-hmm. I said it in a video on my personal channel. Check it out, Sparkin Sports Football. I said that's a fireable offense. It really is. I don't understand why you feel like you need to get that aggressive in that situation. Yes, you're playing the Kansas City Chiefs. Yes, to that point, the Kansas City Chiefs hadn't punted, but the odds of that play converting are just way too low, especially backed up in your own territory like that. It's so frustrating to see coaching blunders once again waste another phenomenal Josh Allen performance. And I think it's very fair to have the conversation, should the Buffalo Bills move on from Sean McDermott? As Broncos fans, we well know that we haven't been afraid to move on from a coach after a divisional round exit, cough John Fox. And this is now 2 divisional round exits in a row. And then it was divisional last year. And then they went to the AFC Championship game in 2020, and they didn't make it either. For several years in a row now, the Buffalo Bills have underachieved under Sean McDermott. Last year, you could make the excuse for their underachievement. Okay, they had a bunch of injuries, and then what happened with Damar Hamlin kind of just pushed things over the edge in the locker room in terms of the locker room mentality. But this year, there were no excuses, man, especially after what the Buffalo Bills did in the second half of the season. They were looking like one of the best teams in football. Josh Allen, throughout the course of almost the entire year, was an MVP candidate for me. He was phenomenal this pretty much the entire year. Yes, he's turnover prone, but that's just who Josh Allen is. You got to take the bad with the good, essentially. But it's so frustrating. Again, the Bills ravaged on defense by injuries, but just schematically, they were out-coached by Andy Reid again in the playoffs. If your ceiling for the Buffalo Bills is beat the Kansas City Chiefs every year in the regular season and then lose in embarrassing fashion in the playoffs to the Chiefs or the Bengals or whoever you're going to face, then Sean McDermott's your guy. But I genuinely feel like we need to have the conversation of the Buffalo Bills moving in a different direction at head coach, and I feel like Ben Johnson is a good direction to move into.
Well, but even then, if it's not Ben Johnson, and the thing is, like, to piggyback off of what you said earlier, like, the Buffalo Bills, if they wanted to, and we're not trying to force someone to lose their job, because we don't ever want someone to lose their job, right? We don't ever want that. But you do have to look at yourselves in the mirror. If you're the Buffalo Bills, you have to look at yourselves in the mirror, and I think that for them, this is that opportunity to do that. And of course, the reason why is it's not just because Ben Johnson is out there or Ben Slowick is out there. You actually have the possibility to do something even more insane. And if I'm not mistaken, I actually said this, maybe not necessarily knowing how it would unfold. I think I may have mentioned this on Sports Nonsense and Whiskey and Pinky, who's in the chat, can maybe confirm this. I actually said that the Bills have a chance to do something pretty crazy, which is at the end of the year, they could move on from Sean McDermott and hire Bill Belichick. If they move on from Bill Belichick, I think I may have, Pinky, if you're in the chat, please confirm that. But I think that the fact that now he's free, if you will, Belichick is free, he has that chance to do something toxic, if you will, and be still in the AFC East. But also, if you're the Bills, you have to look at yourself in the fact of, let's be aggressive and go out and get rather 2 upgrades, like true 2 upgrades at head coach with guys like Jim Harbaugh Bill Belichick, and frankly, even Pete Carroll, because it seems like maybe Pete Carroll's not necessarily done coaching, if you will. He's an advisor, if you will, for the Seahawks, but it doesn't seem like maybe he's even ruling out the possibility of coaching. So those are 3 potential upgrades that you could have at your head coach. Now, the thing that at least gives some possibility for you, like on a guy like a Jim Harbaugh, or really even a Bill Belichick, is the opportunity that they could very well wait for you to open up that job. And the reason why I say Jim Harbaugh is because he's notorious for waiting. I mean, especially in the Broncos job, they had no idea whether or not he was going to take that Broncos job. That thing prolonged, and thankfully you did have other candidates, of course, like, Sean Payton, of course, and D'Amico Ryans. They had other candidates, but like it was prolonged enough to where they easily could have waited if they want to, right? So I think it's certainly possible and something that you can't rule out. I'm not saying they'll go out and hire a Ben Johnson, right? Because you still want to be able to hire the best candidate, but they do have legitimate, possible Gary Kubiak-ish type, replacements. I'm not saying, Bill Belichick and Jim Harbaugh or even a Pete Carroll are like Gary Kubiak type coach. They're actually better than a Gary Kubiak. I'm just saying that, like, where what your example is saying of Gary Kubiak, you actually can replace that, right? You can actually replace that with a little bit of a more seasoned and well-respected coach like that with those candidates.
I think Bill Belichick would be a hard sell to Bills Mafia just because of 20 years of heartbreak and torture against him. I just feel like that would be a very hard sell. I understand the front office would feel a different way and the ownership would feel a different way. It would be really weird and really awkward, kind of the same way with Atlanta, but I think it would be that times 10 with Buffalo, just because of all that history there. So I don't know if the Bills would go in the Bill Belichick direction. They could, but I do think Jim Harbaugh would be a very intriguing fit working with Josh Allen. It's been far too long since we've had Jim Harbaugh in the NFL. I really feel like that could be a very strong option. And I think I've heard today that the Chargers have put a very strong offer on the table for Harbaugh, dangling that Justin Herbert carrot, but Josh Allen and the Bills would be a much better opportunity, I feel like, for Jim Harbaugh. So who knows? Maybe he is a little patient with this and tells the Chargers, all right, I'm going to give this a little bit of time and I'm going to think about this a little bit. Thinking about it basically means I'm going to wait and see what happens out in Buffalo if they move on from Sean McDermott, because I think Buffalo would immediately become the most intriguing job out there in a heartbeat, just because of where they are, how close they are. Sean McDermott, I don't want to bash on him because he's done a phenomenal job resetting that locker room culture and building that team, much like John Fox did in Denver. But ultimately, it was another coach who needed to be put in to help the team get over the hump and win a championship. The Bills' championship window is closing rather quickly with Josh Allen's big money starting to hit. It's just going to be really difficult, much like the Kansas City Chiefs are seeing, to fill that kind of roster. But if you've got a Hall of Fame coach and a Hall of Fame quarterback, you can overcome a lot of roster issues, just like the Kansas City Chiefs have to their 6th AFC championship appearance under Patrick Mahomes. So I personally feel like at this point in time, Sean McDermott it's just time for a different voice in that locker room. It's time for different leadership. The Bills Mafia should have no ill will towards Sean McDermott at all, and they should thank him for what he's done, but it's just time. The reason why I bring up Ben Johnson is just because what he could do schematically with a quarterback like Josh Allen, that just is highly intriguing to me. But if you're the Bills, you're thinking about also who would be the best leader for your locker room, and Jim Harbaugh would definitely check that box, I feel like.
Obviously, Sports Nonsense and Whiskey dropped it in here that he feels like they would need a true number one. Actually, they did have a true number one. I think if they needed a true number one, you hate to say it because you don't know if it's confirmed or whether it's true, but they need a true number one that is going to be able to mesh with Josh Allen. Stephon Diggs, as much as he's a great wide receiver, is a wide receiver one. He is a wide receiver one. He did have some bad cases of the drops. It's fair to admit that. But I think that he absolutely needs a wide receiver that they are just going to be on the absolute same page with. I mean, a case in point, and this is, going to be a conversation if Kirk Cousins moves on or stays put. I think it's far more likely he stays put still. But there's a very good relationship with Justin Jefferson and Kirk Cousins, like a very good relationship between those two.
Yep,
like that is
tell you that.
Like that is the kind of yin and yang relationship that Josh Allen needs with a true number one. So he's had a number one. He just needs that one that he can absolutely trust on any single down, and and a guy that he can really trust in any situation. So moving on forward with that game, maybe this was just I think from an objective point of view, it was nice to see Travis Kelce at least be a little bit more Travis Kelce, if you will. I think so. If you are moving forward with this breaking down of the Kansas City going forward, you're going to need that kind of performance if you're the Chiefs to get back to the Super Bowl, right? Because we all know that, especially with, let's just be completely honest, the lack of wide receiver room that they have, except for Rashee Rice, as much as we like the fact that Rashee Rice has been a key factor, if you will, lately within that room, Kelce is just that upper tier. And we know that of all the safety valves that is on that team, Kelce is number one. And so if that could be the recipe for the Chiefs moving forward offensively like that, that will just help their cause even more to get them to the Super Bowl.
100%, man. And you saw that chemistry with Mahomes and Kelce on full display in that Buffalo Bills game. Just Kelce's ability to find the soft spot in the zone and Mahomes to know exactly where he's going to be at all times. Kelce can still, I think that he is thinking about his health a little bit more for the first time in his career and is not willing to maybe stretch out for a seam ball and take a big old shot over the middle of the field. I don't think that he's willing to do that quite as much anymore, but he's still Travis Kelce, man. He showed it in this game. 5 catches, 75 yards, 2 tuggies. That's a performance that the Kansas City Chiefs are going to need consistently from Kelce if they're going to go on a championship run, as much as it hurts for us in Broncos country to say that. This team, if they are rolling and if Travis Kelce is rolling, this team is literally unstoppable. They really are, because it feels like this team has always been Travis Kelce dependent from the get-go. And in the games where Travis hasn't shown up for one reason or another, be it reasons in his control or out of his control, that's when the Kansas City Chiefs have had their worst offensive output, especially, the Denver Broncos game where they scored only 9 points. That was a big issue. There were times where rarely Mahomes and Kelce weren't on the same page in that game. So yeah, this offense goes as Mahomes and Kelce go as a tandem. And if they can do what they did against Buffalo, then they're going to be unstoppable.
Offensively, we should clarify. Defensively, there's still some holes a little bit on that team. They may be a really good defense just as a whole season goes, the Kansas City Chiefs. But, this is a really tough matchup upcoming. We'll do a little bit of a championship preview a little bit later, but why I mentioned in terms of the preview is because you hope that some of these injuries that the Chiefs players sustained in that game aren't going to keep them out of that game. In particular, a guy like a Willie Gay, who was the guy that was spying Josh Allen throughout that game. They need a linebacker like that, especially in that game. Now, granted, will it have that much of an impact against a guy like a Lamar Jackson? I don't think so. But those are the types of players, key players that you need in that type of game to really make a difference on the defensive side of the ball. So Willie Gay needs to be there for the Kansas City Chiefs, and Joe Thuney on the offensive side of the ball for that offensive line. You need those key offensive linemen, and those injuries at a key point, despite the win, you do wonder how much of a cost that was with the fact that they did beat Buffalo. But we all know that it's also not just the Mahomes and Kelsey show, but of course it's the Andy Reid show, and he's the one that really stirs the drink down there. Moving forward with the other game, and that, of course, was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Detroit Lions, right? The Detroit Lions, maybe everybody's favorite game to want to watch, I should say, of the weekend. Really a fun game. I mean, like a fun game initially, I should say. And then you really saw the Detroit Lions really pull ahead. And, I can't help but think, Gage, obviously the 2012 draft set the Broncos up for a Super Bowl success in 2015. But I can't help but be reminiscent a little bit of that 2012 draft class because of the fact that the 2023 draft class has really impacted the Lions in 2023 and 2024 of this current playoff year. So and the reason why I say that is because they've gotten an impact from nearly every single member of that draft class. Guys like Jack Campbell, Sam Laporta, and Jahmyr Gibbs are, frankly, two legitimate cases for Rookie of the Year, Offensive Rookie of the Year. It's probably going to go to Stroud or Puka Nacua, but they deserve their flowers, right? They deserve their praise, for how well they played this year. And especially the defensive side of the ball. If there is a coach, frankly, that absolutely deserves a head coaching job because of the playoffs, it's Aaron Glenn. And Aaron Glenn has been absolutely superior with how he's been playing and coaching defensively in the red zone and just the defense as a whole. The defense is playing really hard with him. And frankly, if you actually look at it from his resume, his defenses have gotten better each and every year under him.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what I was going to say. That I feel like Aaron Glenn, my business partner is a Detroit Lions fan. He hosts Detroit Lions Syndicate, and he's somebody who's been a harsh critic of Aaron Glenn. But over these last few weeks, he's really been able to improve some of the fundamental issues the defense has had. They've made some personnel changes as well that I feel like has really helped things out. But just to your point again, Aaron Glenn's defenses, I feel like, have steadily improved each and every single season, because you think about when the Detroit Lions started off with that regime, their defense was god awful, especially the secondary. And the secondary still has a few issues like here and there, like plucky issues. But overall, man, just to your point, I feel like, again, Aaron Glenn has done a phenomenal job in the playoffs. I apologize for interrupting.
No, you're good. And on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers front, I mean, it's really, I think, easy for you to be a Buccaneers fan, and of course we'll talk about the Packers and the San Francisco Niners game, and even the Houston Texans. But like, I feel like if you are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, if you are the Green Bay Packers, and you're the Houston Texans, you are feeling quite good, right? Like, you are feeling quite good with what the future currently sits for your franchise. Especially the Buccaneers. And let's just talk about the Buccaneers here for a second, because like, they were a team post Brady that was like, to a certain extent, like the Denver Broncos. Like, what is that future going to consist of? Well, I'll tell you what, they went out and they signed Baker Mayfield, and you can hate on Baker Mayfield as much as you want, personality maybe, or you don't like the person necessarily, but I'll tell you what, he had that team fighting all season long. He had a tremendous season, actually. He had like 31 touchdowns to 11 interceptions. The touchdown-interception ratio was actually stellar. They rightfully won that division. The offensive weapons was steadily there. Mike Evans is a future Hall of Famer for a reason. He always will get the 1,000 yards. And frankly, as much as I will sound biased on this, Trey Palmer affected that offense so much this year because of his speed and with how he was able to operate in the slot. And I think that, now finally getting to see that emergence of a Cade Otton with what has transpired on the season, the Buccaneers have to feel really, really good as far as how things are transpiring. And especially, I don't think there's no person of that entire team that at least has to feel so good than Todd Bowles. Here's a guy that has been, if you will, underappreciated in the coaching circles. Probably should never have been let go by the New York Jets, and given a fair shake at another coaching gig. And I'll tell you what, the Buccaneers, they are looking really good as far as what their future is. Obviously, it still hinges on Baker Mayfield, but I think it's fair to assume there that he's coming back.
I could not agree more, man. The Buccaneers are a team that I do have some emotional connection to. My boss and good friend Robbie is a Buccaneers fan. We actually went to a bar and watched the game together. So I got to experience his emotional roller coaster along with him. The Buccaneers do have some free agents this offseason that they're going to have to address. Antoine Winfield, Mike Evans, and of course Baker Mayfield. And there are a few other names as well, but those are like the big three. Levante David is another one as well. They're future Hall of Fame linebacker. I know you'll have some bias there, Cam.
Just a
little bit. But if they can get those pieces figured out, they're going to have to add another piece at linebacker if they do indeed retain Levante David, because they've pretty much signaled they're going to move on from Devin White. They might bring KJ Britt back there on the other side, but that's going to be something to look at. They've done a really, really good job developing their defensive line this year. Kalijah Cansey has been a breakout player for them. I really feel like the Buccaneers have some positive momentum that they build on this year. And shout out to Jason Light and that front office. They built a damn good roster when Tom Brady was there. And the fact that that was able to carry over into this season, Baker Mayfield, man, career year under Dave Canales. He's probably going to get a head coaching job. Canales is this offseason. I'm very smitten with what the Buccaneers have done, are building. Todd Bowles, massive shout out to you, dude. Again, I'm glad you touched on that, Cam. He's so underappreciated. His defense is the heart and soul of that team. And Baker Mayfield is the heart and soul of that team. I am so smitten with that team again, man. I'm really excited for where they're heading.
And then moving forward with the other game, which was actually, as you would expect, a really good game. When you think about Matt LaFleur against Kyle Shanahan, they know each other quite well, dating back to even the Washington Redskins at the time, the Washington Redskins staff at the time, being on Mike Shanahan's staff, of course, and then going, of course, to Dan Quinn, Mr. Possibly a Denver Broncos head coaching candidate, Dan Quinn, and now possibly returning home back to Seattle to be maybe their head coach, possibly, down the line. Staff, of course, because why? I mean, Matt LaFleur was on that staff. Kyle Shanahan was on that staff. Mike McDaniel was on that staff. I mean, there was everybody and their mother, it feels like, that were successful on that staff. So they know each other quite well. And I think what's funny, and this is maybe a nice little transition to, as far as I should say, maybe a main conversation under Broncos country that's at least a fair conversation. And we'll talk about the Baltimore and Houston game too, kind of lumping that together. But like, you did, as much as we talk, let's start with the Packers first, because the Buccaneers was a nice transition, into that. You have to love with what the Packers were doing. And frankly, there were only two teams. Right, there were only two teams that the Broncos lost to in this postseason who advanced, right? It was the Houston Texans and it was the Detroit Lions. Those were the two teams that they lost to on the entire season. And then now, when you see the way they performed, it's really understandable to see why. And the one that always will puzzle you is of a team that advanced is the Green Bay Packers. To think about how far they've come in such a short season and a short half season under specifically Jordan Love, it's actually remarkable, because Jordan Love, the growth he has shown on a week in and week out basis, it's like, it was this truly the same quarterback that they played in week 5 against the Green Bay Packers, right? The Broncos. Like, it just doesn't feel that way. I mean, he clearly has just been an absolute gamer. And I think what you're starting to see is a Packers organization that really just for some reason has operated in this, we really understand patience at the quarterback position, and we really know when is the right time to select a quarterback, develop the quarterback, and when we develop that quarterback, understanding that this is a guy that is in our future plans for quite a while. And Jordan Love really proved that in that year. And because, I mean, we're talking about a guy that coming into the league, right, had a lot of question marks, Gage. He had a lot of question marks as far as, he was truly a project But when you turn the tape on, you saw a very athletic and toolsy quarterback that, frankly, the moment Matt LaFleur got his hands on him, he molded him into the quarterback he wanted this year.
Absolutely. There was always a special talent when you turned on Jordan Love's Utah State tape. That was one of the first years I started watching tape, evaluating draft prospects, and I remember just the upside Jordan Love had, I felt like made him worth being selected by the Packers where he was selected. I felt like the fact that he fell that far was surprising. And Matt LaFleur developing him for these past 3 years under Aaron Rodgers. And again, even when Love saw the field this year, it took some time to kind of mold some of those kinks out of him. But when he did, especially after that Denver game, man, I feel like that's when things started to shift, was after that Denver game for the Green Bay Packers. You remember that Kansas City Chiefs game where he absolutely lit them up, man. Jordan Love, the progression throughout the entire season, I feel like has just been phenomenal, but also the growth and development of some of the young guys around him. Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks at receiver have really stepped up. Tucker Kraft at tight end, Luke Musgrave, unfortunately, he's dealt with some injuries this year.
Tucker Kraft, though.
Yeah, Tucker Kraft was really good, man, especially these last few weeks. So this direction that the Packers are heading in, much like the teams that we've talked about already in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I couldn't be happier if I were a Green Bay Packers fan as far as where they're headed.
I mean, and frankly, we're talking about a wide receiver room with the Green Bay Packers. That's like, maybe they do have a wide receiver one, but that wide receiver one has been injured almost all year. So if you're talking about a team that really does need that wide receiver one, it very clearly could be the Green Bay Packers. And we all know that there's a draft class that's coming into 2024 that is exceptionally loaded at that position. So yes. I would not be surprised, if the Green Bay Packers, they actually doubled up on tight end in this last draft. And that was a really good tight end class. So I wouldn't even be surprised if they did the exact same thing that they did, frankly, a couple years back, where they actually took Romeo Doubs, Samori Toure, and then they actually took another guy.
It was Christian Watson.
It was Christian Watson, right? It was Christian Watson. All in one draft. I could very well see them doing that again, just for the simple fact of, once again, upgrading that room. And defensively, it's a solid unit. It's a really solid unit. And then you go into the 49ers, man, they're just built different. Like, they're just really built different. The 49ers, I feel like, are obviously one of the better teams in the NFL. Like, there's a reason why they're in the NFC Championship, and that's because they may be the best team in the NFL. And when you got to the point where they were down, there was maybe a small part of you that was like, man, are the Packers really going to be doing this? And no, the moment that it happened, where the 49ers really turned it on again, Brock Purdy, that offense. I mean, people can knock Brock Purdy all they want in terms of, possibly being a game manager, but I think he is a game manager. But like, if you were to say someone is like the elitist of possibly being a game manager, it is Brock Purdy to a T for me, because like the way he operates that is just beautiful to watch, because he is, not to use the pun intended, he is a true quarterback for that team because of the amount of weapons that he has at his disposal. Guys like Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, who frankly could be the MVP of the league, not named Lamar Jackson. There's just so many weapons at his disposal that he can do whatever he wants.
Mm-hmm. I feel like Brock Purdy is becoming underrated just because of how well he operates that scheme. I mean, again, just how you said it, an elite game manager, but also, I mean, he creates plays. He operates well off schedule. He's mobile. I feel like Brock Purdy is a complete package, especially for a Kyle Shanahan quarterback, man. What he's being asked to do, he operates it so well. And even in this game, missing arguably one of his top weapons in Deebo Samuel, that offense really didn't miss a beat out there, especially after they kind of stumbled a little bit in the beginning and the Packers kind of ran up on them. But that was more so because Jordan Love was just dealing. But just the way that the 49ers have been able to build a super team, quite frankly, around Brock Purdy. Their offensive line this year, outside of Trent Williams, has had some question marks. I saw John Feliciano out there at center. They've had some question marks there, but I feel like with the weaponry that he has, Brock Purdy, and the elite play calling and schematics with Kyle Shanahan and company, Brock Purdy has been able to thrive.
And the defense is no joke. And there's a reason why people have been saying that the 49ers defense is just an embarrassment of riches. You add Randy Gregory to that mix now, but like Chase Young, Randy Gregory, Nick Bosa, Javon Kinlaw, Eric Armstead, right? Or
Hargrave.
Hargrave. Hargrave was the prize free agent, right? Hargrave was the prize free agent. So like there you go up and down that team, and you haven't even gotten to the other part of that front seven with guys like Fred Warner and Hufanga, right? Hufanga in that secondary, who frankly almost feels like a clone of Troy Polamalu at times, the way he plays the field. Like it's just, there's an embarrassment of riches with how they operate. And it's like, they really didn't miss a beat, with D'Amico Ryan's leaving. They really didn't. And so I think that they're just an exceptionally well-coached team. And I hate to kind of lean it a little bit into possibly my Super Bowl prediction, but like I would love a Baltimore, aside from the fact it's in the script, a Baltimore and San Francisco Super Bowl, just because one, I want to see what round 2 is going to be like, because Baltimore manhandled them.
They did.
They manhandled them. And we know sometimes on record that the second time around doesn't necessarily fare all that best. And if you give that extra type of preparation to a guy like a Kyle Shanahan, or more importantly, just the 49ers in general, they'll make you pay.
I think he's already prepping to meet Baltimore again. I really do, man. I feel like the way that Kyle Shanahan was, quite frankly, embarrassed out there by the Baltimore Ravens, he knows where they went wrong and how to correct it. And he's had about a month, and then he's going to have another 2 weeks after that. Basically, he's been preparing for a rematch with the Baltimore Ravens, because I'd argue outside of the 49ers, the Ravens are the second best team in football right now. That roster is freaking loaded, man. And Lamar Jackson, oh my God. Well, I know we'll be talking about him in a second, but man, let's talk about it, man. Lamar Jackson, best quarterback in the NFL right now. What he's been able to do in this Todd Monken scheme, oh my God, bro. Both in the air and with his legs, Lamar has become a true complete player this year. Any team out there that wasn't willing to give up 2 first-round picks and give Lamar a big contract, fools.
Yeah, and especially for a guy even before the doubt, the fact that what was it going to be like with Todd Monken? He won an MVP. And I think that the thing that is just mind-boggling to me about Lamar is, one, he's not necessarily the most accurate passer in the world, but he is certainly really good at it. At times, he's still really good at it. And frankly, this is a really good comparison for this, because it's like, if you actually look at his collegiate tape, right? What was one of the things that you saw with his collegiate tape? He was in a pro-style offense, and 2, he got better every single year at Louisville. And what are you starting to see with the Baltimore Ravens? You're starting to see him literally get better every single year. You're seeing him get better, as a passer, obviously with him being as a runner, and you see the marriage for what it's been, if you will, with a guy like a Todd Monken. It's just such an elite pairing that, frankly, obviously it really makes you wonder how that marriage had been with a guy like Greg Roman. But it's almost like if you were to take Stetson Bennett, drop him into the super soldier serum of, in Captain America, First Avenger, and he comes out and he's Lamar Jackson. That's exactly what Todd Monken basically made right there within that offense. That was the type of offense, if you will, that Stetson Bennett was running at Georgia. And it's just been humming ever since he came into the league. And that's why you're seeing the running game be so effective with guys like Keaton Mitchell. Dalvin Cook's now entered the mix. I mean, like Gus Edwards, Justice Hill. I mean, they're not really household names, but they're making it work because of how effective the offensive line is, the scheme is, and just how a well-oiled machine, how well coached that team is under John Harbaugh.
There's one back that they couldn't make work in that scheme, though, and that's our old friend Melvin Gordon.
He fumbled the bag, if you will.
Yep, he sure did, man. Freaking he gets his one shot, and what does he do? He fumbles it. Melvin Gordon, oh my God, man, don't get me started on him. That's a trigger point for me. But again, this Baltimore Ravens team, what they've been able to do, their run game, just like you mentioned, Gus Edwards, Justice Hill, those guys, again, just like you said, may not be household names, but they get the job done. They are super effective. And then receiver-wise, I mean, Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman have really stepped into their own. They've got OBJ there, he may not be the OBJ of 2014, but he can still make some big-time plays for you when he's called upon. I really hope that Odell can get another ring, and he got robbed of the Super Bowl MVP in the Rams and Bengals Super Bowl because of that injury. I'm hoping he gets a chance to redeem himself. I think we could see, if he gets to the Super Bowl again, that kind of performance again where, dude, OBJ, he would have gotten Super Bowl MVP if he didn't tear his ACL in that game.
Well, but we also know that who also went off in that game, and of course it was Cooper Kupp.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah. But I think that, and this is in correlation with Lamar Jackson. It's just like, it also shows you how good Lamar Jackson has been, because like he's turning a wide receiving core, that isn't necessarily full of like number one wide receivers, but I think that they're just really, really solid and well coached wide receivers. So you put Odell Beckham Jr. into that room, and frankly, this is, I think, if you were to mold what a Baltimore Ravens team should have been, a very solid, possible number one, with who he was at OBJ, with a draft pick of Zay Flowers and what they can become, it's an ideal situation. And if you are the Philadelphia Eagles, I would be mirroring, possibly what the Ravens have been doing. And the reason why I say that is because, you look up and down, they've got depth all across the board now, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And I think that the one position where you really feel like the depth is across the board has been the tight end position. They won and possibly advancing to the Super Bowl without Mark Andrews.
Mm-hmm.
Like without Mark Andrews. Like as you look at the Philadelphia Eagles, like, and if they wanted to mirror that, like it's Dallas Goedert and who, right? I mean, it's Cal Contra, who's a decent tight end, Jack Stoll, who's a decent tight end, but he's not Isaiah Likely. So you put Isaiah Likely with a guy like a Mark Andrews now underneath. It's like they're not skipping a beat because of how athletic of a freak he is. And I think, if anything, not to delve a little bit too much into draft talk, it's one of the reasons why going for a positionless tight end, and not just only one, but more than one, is so beneficial for your offense, because, and it's one of the reasons, and possibly one of the reasons why the Broncos were such at a disadvantage because of so far this year, because of Greg Dulcich going down for injury, and possibly, and you hate to say it, in terms of hindsight, because that's what it is, hindsight 2020, the Alberto Cuebanam trade, because I think that it really puts into perspective what could have been if those two tight ends were on the roster, and how effective this team could have been had both of those tight ends been healthy.
Yeah, because let's just be honest here. Adam Troutman was not particularly good last year. Like that, there were times where Adam Troutman was a problem for the Denver Broncos. His blocking had some problems. It's just the Broncos lacked a true dynamic weapon at the tight end position last year. I know how we naturally just pivoted back to the Broncos, but that's what they need to do in the draft. They need to bring in, quite frankly, depth at that position, more adequate depth. And I feel like the Alberto Cuebanam trade, yes, it would have solved some problems just in terms of the explosiveness, but just the Broncos had plenty of issues at that position outside of Albert Okwuegbunam. Even if Greg Dulcich had stayed healthy and they didn't trade Albert Okwuegbunam, and I think we would have probably looked back at the tight end position where we are now and been like, okay, we need to add some more adequate pieces at that position.
And that's the only reason why I say it in hindsight, because it's just like, it is what it is at this point. And the reason why that Albert Okwuegbunam is not here, because he played so well enough that he earned that decent enough trade value for them to move on from him, right? And so, but as far as the Baltimore Ravens, it's like it just goes to show you like how deep that team is, especially within that position. So the transition a little bit as far as maybe even into the championship weekend. Are we leading to possibly the NFL script here, Gage, in terms of our NFL prediction? It feels that way for me right now.
It does. It's not even script related for me. It's just the way that these two teams are playing right now. The 49ers are just completely almost unstoppable. And then same with the Baltimore Ravens. And I'm really excited to see what that matchup would be in the Super Bowl, man. Oh, there'd be so much storyline and intrigue with that one. And I mean, we've seen a Ravens 49ers Super Bowl before, but this one is going to be a lot different and a lot more exciting and intriguing. So again, that's where I feel like things are heading right now, but you never know, man. The Detroit Lions on their best day are also a very unstoppable team. And then Kansas City's Kansas City. They're always going to be in the fight. They're always going to be Super Bowl contenders, no matter how nerfed their roster may be. I still can't believe this is like the worst Kansas City Chiefs roster Mahomes has had, and he still has them in the freaking AFC Championship game. That just goes to show how special that organization is, how special Andy Reid is, and how special number 15 is, man.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I hate heaping praise on the Kansas City Chiefs. It makes me vomit in my mouth every time I do it, but I hate it. But you have to, because they're that damn good.
And I'm really curious to see what the people in the chat say with this. And actually, to bring it back a little bit to the Broncos, I was curious what some of the people's thoughts were. When I tweeted it a while back, like a week ago. And I'm curious what your thoughts are, and we can talk about a little bit more. But if Sean Payton, because Sean Payton did say this, if Sean Payton feels that the Denver Broncos are were the 2022 Detroit Lions, then that means that the 2024 Denver Broncos will be what, Gage?
We will be in the AFC Championship game.
I mean, I write, and I think it's really easy to deduce that, but I think that I think it's really interesting to see what the Broncos do with this, because you look at it from Houston's point of view, and Brandon and I had this conversation last week, and it's so fascinating to me. It does revolve around the quarterback position. To play spoiler alert, it all revolves around the quarterback position. But I think it's really curious to see what the Broncos do with this, because there are a lot of successful avenues that they can go. Like a lot of successful avenues. If you just look strictly at the playoffs. There's a lot of avenues that can go. The Jordan Love route, which is, to use a correlation, the J.J. McCarthy route. They can go with that. They can go and draft J.J. McCarthy and let him sit for a year and a half, maybe two, and it all depends on maybe how he is coming into into the league. Because I mean, frankly, what we see from J.J. McCarthy may not actually be J.J. McCarthy. Case in point, look at Justin Herbert.
Sure.
But I think that's the case there. But then you go out and you see like a CJ Stroud. Now, obviously, I'm not trying to compare Michael Penix, Bo Nix, those types of situations to possibly that kind of situation, or maybe even a Jaden Daniels. Now, do I think they draft Jaden Daniels at this point? Not necessarily, but you can't rule it out, right? You can't rule anything out.
I'm praying for it. I want it to happen so bad.
But you can't rule anything out. But it's just such a fun conversation, because when you look at these playoffs and you clearly see what the Broncos should be doing, and that is making that attempt to go out and get a quarterback, or in particular, any quarterback, it's really crazy to me, Gage, that there are a lot of different avenues. that they can possibly get the job done.
Absolutely. But the fact of the matter is the Broncos have to take a quarterback in the first round. I've had this conversation with a lot of fellow Broncos fans. It's like, what about building the team first and then placing the quarterback in? I feel like the Broncos have tried that strategy for the past 8 years in some way or another, and it just hasn't worked. I am all for bringing in a veteran stopgap, or maybe that guy is Jarrett Stidham. Me personally, I
or
don't
Garoppolo.
Oh God, please no. Like I keep seeing Benjamin Albright tweet about Garoppolo, and it's like my brain doesn't even want to entertain that.
I know.
It's that's disturbing to me. It's like it would have to be a veteran minimum deal with almost no or it would have to be like a deal with no guaranteed money virtually. Oh God, that would be terrible. Just he's oft injured. He's just not good, man. I this last stint with the Raiders, I was so infuriated with how poorly he played. But I personally am like going for like a Jameis Winston, possibly an Andy Dalton who operated the system really well. Gardner Minshew, but he's still under contract with the Colts, so he'd have to either get cut or he'd have to get traded for. So that one I feel like is a little bit lower of a possibility, but I think the Broncos avenue that they're going to head in at quarterback in 2024 is a veteran stopgap. Jarrett Stidham, Jameis Winston, Andy Dalton, possibly Gardner Minshew, but then they're going to have to take that quarterback in the first round, be it trade up to get him or let him fall to you at 12 or even trade down and let him fall to you at some other point. We've gone down every other path since 2017, and it hasn't worked out. Yes, they took a quarterback in 2016 in the first round with Paxton Lynch, and that ended up setting us back because in 2018, Josh Allen comes out. John Elway gets gun shy about it because of the Paxton Lynch experiment failing, and here we are today. We can't be gun shy anymore. We just can't.
And you know, Gage, that you and I are actually seeing rather eye to eye on that. Like I mean, as far as, you know, swinging for the quarterback, you know that you and I are in eye to eye and lockstep on that. I think that the thing that just infuriate is the wrong word, but it frustrates me when I do see, you know, Broncos country a little bit say, well, I'm okay going out and getting, you know, like a Jimmy Garoppolo or a Jameis Winston, you know, and then taking a quarterback next year. Well, it's like, that's great. But like the thing that has made the Broncos who they are the last 8 years is the fact that they've done that. Like the fact that they've done that, they've actually taken guys like that, but with, and it's one of the reasons why, not to use this as a past in the sense of talking about Baker Mayfield, but it's one of the reasons why I was 100% fine with still taking Baker Mayfield the year that they signed Case Keenum, because it was like you had a perfect opportunity to really set you up with prolonged success with Case Keenum, and then you give it off to Baker Mayfield, right? So I think that and so why do I say that? It's because you can go out and sign your Jimmy Garoppolo, which is fine. I will puke, but I will be fine. But the reason why I will be fine is because you absolutely have to draft that quarterback that you want this year. And it's like, and it's not a matter of, okay, wow, great, we signed Jimmy Garoppolo. Great, but there's still got to have some finality to that, because like, you know, to what you said, it's like, it's being able to still swing for the fences for the quarterback. And whether that's still going out and getting a Jaden Daniels, as aggressive as that possibly is, like you have to have that conversation with yourself, because it's like, and especially if you're Sean Payton, like you've got to have that long-term plan. And I think that's the thankful part that the Broncos will find themselves in, right? That the Broncos will find themselves in, you know, this year with looking at this quarterback. Because like, I don't know about you, and maybe this is going to be one of the first times you and I, and since it's just you and I'd be curious to know what you think right now, Gage, because it's like, in what I've been looking at the quarterbacks, you know, specifically in this class, surprisingly, and people in the chat, feel free to chime in as well, but like surprisingly, I actually think there are a decent amount of players that are quarterbacks in this class that could fit almost exactly with what Sean Payton wants as far as a quarterback goes. I mean, like, obviously, we'll touch on it first. Michael Penix, you're not necessarily a huge fan of his per se. I like him, right? I don't love him, but I think one of the deters for me about him is that I feel like the system was set. I also feel like maybe the system itself was maybe built for the success. Now, granted, you can make the case that that's exactly what an NFL team should do, and frankly, that's what an NFL team should do. But like, you just wonder if it takes building an elite offensive line, right? Because that was the Washington Huskies. They had the best offensive line in the NCAA, but they also had really good wide receivers all across the board, and a good tight end, but also with a strong defense, right? So you wonder if maybe that's what it's gonna take for Michael Penix to achieve what it is. But we know an elite quarterback erases all deficiencies, right, Gage?
Yeah.
So I'd be curious, what's your kind of take too about Michael Penix? Because it's like, he's accurate, he's very decisive, like he processes exceptionally well, but a little bit there's that decision making with that.
Mm-hmm. Decision making is a concern. I'll say accuracy is good when he's in the pocket throwing on base, but when he has to throw off platform, when he's throwing on the run, that can sell him short a little bit. We saw that pop up, I feel like, in the national championship game. But I feel like Michael Penix is a guy who would fit well in terms of what Sean Payton wants, just in terms of the quick decision making. Even though sometimes it may not be the right decision, he does make his decision processes quick at the line of scrimmage. And being able to operate that sort of quick game style offense, I think that could suit him well. And that's what scheme he would thrive in. My reservations about Michael Penix are, is he worth the 12th overall pick in the draft? I don't think so, especially when I feel like there are other quarterbacks out there who have a much higher ceiling, especially from a physical talent perspective. Jaden Daniels is still my love child in this year's class. I mean, I am smitten over Jaden Daniels to a T, but I'm realizing that he's probably not going to be in striking distance for the Denver Broncos. You have to pivot towards like the Bo Nixes, the Michael Penix Jr.'s, the JJ McCarthy's. And right now, I would much rather have somebody like a Bo Nix or a JJ McCarthy than a Michael Penix. And I've heard from guys like Benjamin Albright that the fan opinion of Penix is apparently a lot higher than the overall league opinion is. So if the Broncos were looking at a scenario where they'd maybe trade down to like the 20th overall pick, 23rd overall pick, and maybe see if Penix could fall to that point, I'd be okay with that.
Even a Bo Nix.
Even a Bo Nix, exactly, because you're accumulating future draft assets in the event that either this quarterback does not work out, or you can build the team around the quarterback and accumulate more assets that way. So I'm okay with that scenario no matter what, really.
Obviously, I kind of told you a little bit how I feel about Bo Nix, kind of taking a 180 a little bit for me as far as with Bo Nix. Like, I really, really like Bo Nix. But I'm curious what your thoughts are right now about, that other older quarterback, Bo Nix.
I haven't properly evaluated Bo Nix. I'm looking to get some all 22 of him. I've heard some really good things about him, but I can't really speak too much on him as I haven't evaluated him.
Okay. Obviously, he came from the Oregon system, as we know. It's almost like the reverse Jarrett Stidham, right?
Okay. Yeah,
because he started his career at Auburn, and Stidham finished his collegiate career at Auburn.
Yep.
Yeah. Obviously, the only thing that's different is, there is Baylor and Oregon, of course. But I like Nix, and frankly, we talked about this particular quarterback a little bit earlier, but this type of quarterback, frankly, would fit really well with what Sean Payton wants to do, probably within an offense, and in terms of a space creator quarterback with crossers, the way he processes, the way he's able to get playmakers the football. Sound a little bit familiar to you, to a guy by the name of maybe a Brock Purdy? Like, I think that Bo Nix, like, he's got he's really decisive when he throws the football, and he's got that really subtle yet very athletic frame to where he's able to escape the pressure and escape the pocket a little bit and get those yards, right? So I'm very fascinated about a guy like a Bo Nix. And then the other guy that I wanted to touch on a little bit is a guy that's actually been catching steam the last few weeks. And that's a guy that, frankly, if Sean Payton was coming down there from the Bayou, he might be a little bit familiar with down there. And that would be the quarterback down there at Tulane, Mr. Michael Pratt. I'm really curious to see what the evaluation.
You are breaking up. I cannot hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't sound like I'm breaking up, but I apologize if it sounds like I'm breaking up. What I was gonna say though.
No, you're good now. It was just going for a second.
What I was gonna say is, like, in terms of Michael Pratt being one of those other options, for Sean Payton. I think that, here's a guy down there in the Bayou. Maybe he does have some familiarity with maybe those ties down there in New Orleans. You actually look at him. You maybe have some subtle conversations down there, maybe with Dan Campbell down there in Detroit. Maybe you see yourself with a little bit of some similarities, maybe for a guy like a Jared Goff down there, and you can develop. So, like, I feel like there's some different pieces you can possibly add to that mix. Michael Pratt, he's not as athletic as a Bo Nix, but he is just the one thing that just Pratt excels at, especially, is that intermediate game. And he is not afraid to throw the deep ball. He's not like a super accurate thrower of the deep ball, but he really understands how to operate that intermediate game, and really, I should say, just an offense in general. One of the best games to certainly watch is that USC game. He went toe-to-toe with the number one quarterback that probably and will likely get drafted, and they won that game.
Well, there you go. I'm going to have to go and watch some Michael Pratt tape.
Yeah, he's fascinating because it's like it ranges from this guy could be a possible starter to he's a Ryan Fitzpatrick's of the world, right? Like, he's a Ryan Fitzpatrick of the world, where he's a really solid starter, but he's also a very prolonged backup in the NFL. So I'm really curious to see, within some of these quarterbacks. And we didn't get a chance to touch on JJ McCarthy because JJ McCarthy is a trigger point, with the members of Broncos Twitter. And of course, this is just the first part, of course, in talking about the quarterback. So we'll talk about JJ McCarthy some more. But any other final thoughts as far as the coaching carousel, your new favorite team in the NFL, the Tennessee Titans, has decided to make its coaching hire. They decided to hire Brian Callahan, son of Bill Callahan, the one who tortured and ruined the entire Nebraska Cornhuskers franchise for a period of time. He is the new head coach of the Tennessee Titans. What's your thoughts on that hire?
I like Brian Callahan. I do. But you replaced Mike Vrabel with Brian Callahan. Dude, listen, this is not a knock on Callahan. I think he's going to do a really good job, especially working with Will Levis. He did a really, really great job in Cincinnati. He's got Denver Broncos roots. I'm rooting for Brian Callahan. But organizationally, I don't understand this at all from the Tennessee Titans. I will not understand it unless they yield significant results. Mike Vrabel had that team one game away from the Super Bowl in 2019. Mike Vrabel has had that team overachieve with a shit roster for the last 2 seasons. The fact that the Tennessee Titans made that move to get rid of Vrabel, you can go listen to my 10-minute rant on Sparkin Sports Football about it. I was extremely infuriated with that move. I like what Brian Callahan's going to be able to do schematically for them. He'll be able to kind of introduce sort of that modern pro spread West Coasty blend that they do in Cincinnati. So I'm really, really excited for that. But dude, organizationally, what the hell are you doing, Tennessee?
Yeah. As far as Cam Ward actually went back to the University of Miami. And Pinky, actually, if you're listening, I'm surprised you didn't know that, considering you're a Miami Hurricanes fan.
Yeah.
So
I like Cam Ward too. I'm excited for next year.
Did that surprise you a little bit when he did go back? Because I think for me it was like, it's a gamble. Like and I say it's a gamble because he said he was coming back and he was getting evaluations that he was a day 2 pick, right? A day 2 pick, which would be round 2, round 3, right?
Yep.
That's not that's like not a slouch round to be possibly taken. And
if he goes in second round, it's like could be like a Jalen Hurts situation,
Right. I mean, Kirk Cousins, I think, was taken in the 3rd round. Brock Osweiler was second. I'm joking in the sense of Brock Osweiler, but I mean, like, Russell Wilson was taken in the 2nd round. Like, there's been successful quarterbacks that have been taken in those later rounds. Brock Purdy was Mr. Irrelevant. So, I mean, it's just like things happen. And so I wonder if he was just tipped off with maybe the NIL money, or the simple fact maybe he didn't have an agent, which I think it's very likely to assume he didn't have an agent, for that to happen. But yeah, I just thought that was really interesting that he declared and then, transferred down there over at Miami, because he would have been a very intriguing quarterback, starting to look into. So the other coaching news, of course, is everything that is surrounding the divisional team. And that would be the Los Angeles Chargers and Jim Harbaugh. We mentioned John Harbaugh earlier, but Jim Harbaugh, I'm really curious to see how this unfolds. Like, and to preface everything that I talked about today on social media with some fans, it's not that I actually hate itself, the Jim Harbaugh to the Chargers move. I don't, objectively speaking, I really don't hate that move, because you can't really hate that move. The question is just, and me and actually Carl Demler and Brandon talked about this a couple weeks ago, but it's like, I don't understand the fit from the top part, not the bottom part. The bottom part is the player personnel. The player personnel side of things, I am completely fine. Frankly, it scares me. It's a nightmare situation for the Broncos and the player personnel decision-making, because it's like you're talking about Jim Harbaugh giving the reins to a Los Angeles Chargers team that's led by Justin Herbert. Like, that's a nightmare fuel in that type of situation. But we're also talking about the same front office, Dean Spanos, who is cheap. He is poor. He's in a rent-a-stadium. Like, it's a rent-a-stadium with the Los Angeles Rams. And even before then, they played at a soccer stadium. They just, for some reason, just don't decide to throw money around. And I would commend them. I would commend them in the fact that they were able to make the strong offer for Harbaugh. But also, if you're Harbaugh, there are some decent enough pros for you to stay where you're at. And one being, in 2 words, Nick Saban. He's gone. He's gone at Alabama. So now you have the chance to be the new godfather of college football if you stay there with the University of Michigan.
I agree, man. It's like the Chargers are a fool's gold job. I've said this for several years now. Every time they have a coaching opening, they were a fool's gold job with Phillip Rivers, and they continue to be a fool's gold job with Justin Herbert. They have so many organizational problems, even with Tom Telesco, their GM, gone, with Dean Spanos. Is it still Dean Spanos, the controlling owner? I kind of jumble that whole family together, basically.
I think it's still the Spanos family. I don't know if it's Dean, but it's, yeah.
It's the Spanos. Yeah, they're all the same. I jumble them all together, but organizationally, they make bad decisions. They don't have the money to back up a lot of what they do. It's so frustrating to see this Chargers team consistently underachieve just from a pure NFL fan perspective. Obviously, as a Broncos fan, I'm not disappointed at all, but would the Chargers be able to commit to giving Jim Harbaugh the resources that he needs and wants to be successful? I don't know if they can.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and here's the thing too in terms of cheap. We touched on this with Carl, but it's like he just won the national championship, and speculation was just running rampant in the sense of like that deal, that contract that he was possibly going to sign with the Broncos was upwards of possibly 14 to 15 million a year, right? Or like the 12 to 15 million a year almost, right? So it's like he just won the national championship. So maybe money is not an object for him necessarily, but this is his first NFL gig. This is his first NFL gig, in quite a while. So winning a national championship and possibly getting a deal like that, I don't know if the Chargers can do that. And I know that the coaching money and stuff is separate alone from from just its cap space, but still, it's like, I don't know if the Chargers can do that.
But that's cash they have to dip into their pockets and get for the coaching. It's like, but I've heard through reporters that that I trust. I can't remember exactly who it was, but it was a reporter I remember that I trusted. They said that the offer is $20 million. It's around Sean Payton money, basically.
Which is what it should be.
Which is what it should be. Absolutely. But again, if the Chargers hand over Jim Harbaugh that chunk of money, will they have money to spend at other positions? Will they have the money to hire an adequate general manager? Because Jim Harbaugh will probably want to handpick his general manager, I would imagine, someone who could oversee all the personnel decisions. And I've also heard that Harbaugh would want to completely overhaul that coaching staff there. And they have some good pieces. They have Kellen Moore, who I thought did a really good job offensively with Justin Herbert last year. And then they have Ryan Ficken, who's a damn good special teams coordinator. Apparently, they want to bring in Jay Harbaugh, Jim's son, to be the special teams coordinator. This is per Michigan Nation 2 on Twitter. And then also Jesse Minter, to bring in him from Michigan to be the defensive coordinator. So there'd be some potential nepotistic hires there and replacing some really good staff members if Harbaugh comes in. I don't know how I'd feel about this if I were a Chargers fan.
And guess who will replace Kellen Moore?
Yeah, Greg Roman.
Yeah.
I'm trying to imagine Justin Herbert running a Greg Roman offense.
Well, and again, not to play the card again, but it's like, if this thing prolonged itself, you wonder if Harbaugh is either contemplating not just the Chargers job, but he's actually contemplating the Atlanta situation. Like, that's the thing that's just so, like, again, like, to go into that coaching job a little bit too, it's like, it does feel like it's trending to Bill Belichick, right? Like, that's kind of what we're reading, and it feels like it's trending that way. But like the Chargers and like this situation, or even to it, it's like, wouldn't you want to lock up a guy like that as soon as possible? Like a guy like a Jim Harbaugh or even a Bill Belichick? That, to me, like, and they still they still can, and that's fine. But it's just like, for a guy like that, of that ilk, Bill Belichick, and especially you, and especially from the especially from the standpoint of the Chargers, you've already fulfilled, right? That was out there. They've already fulfilled the Rooney rule specifications, so they've already fulfilled that. So now they can go out and actually make that happen. And we know that Harbaugh has a second interview lined up with the Falcons. And if you were to ask me, what is the best situation for Jim Harbaugh? It's the Atlanta Falcons. You can go handpick your quarterback. I hope it's J.J. McCarthy, just for the simple fact of quarterbacks falling down. But, like, you can literally handpick your quarterback down there at Atlanta, and you could be cooking with grease with the fact that, like, you have weapons galore that you can work with Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Bijan Robinson. I mean, like, the Atlanta Falcons truly are in a win-win situation.
And apparently, Harbaugh is a very strong candidate for Atlanta. According to Benjamin Albright, there could be some issues with Bill Belichick and Rich McKay, the Falcons team president. I believe he was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers general manager back in the day, but apparently there could be some headbutting there that could deter Bill Belichick from the Atlanta job. So maybe they do go in the direction of a Jim Harbaugh, but then it's a very similar situation there. It's like, does Jim Harbaugh want to deal with Rich McKay? That's the big question here. So if I'm Harbaugh, I'm waiting again, like we talked about earlier, to see what happens in Buffalo. And if they do indeed dismiss Sean McDermott, Buffalo would probably be my hottest target if I'm Jim Harbaugh, or really any candidate that's available out there. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens with Bill Belichick too, because if the Falcons doesn't happen. Like, again, we saw that they gave that second interview to Bill Belichick, but now they moved on and have given second interviews to Jim Harbaugh and I believe one other candidate as well. And then you combine that with the report that Benjamin Albright tweeted out earlier today. Maybe Belichick to the Falcons isn't quite as sure of a thing as we initially thought it was. So there's still a lot of intriguing conversations to be had, and there's still 5 head coaching jobs that have yet to be filled.
Yeah, and the new rumor that came out today was that Pete Carroll is starting to percolate a little bit with the Los Angeles Chargers.
Yep.
I mean, so like,
yep.
And so maybe it's just the simple fact that maybe, they just feel like there's things trending, because like the other part of it is, if you're Harbaugh, this will be the first time he's taken 2 second interviews in one cycle. Like the Broncos were his only, second interview of the last cycle, and obviously he turned it down, right? Or actually, I should say the Broncos went and sought him out, and then they had another interview, right? Because that was kind of how it all went down. They would, so I would not be surprised if this thing certainly even goes into a different direction. And I'm a little bit surprised that Mike Vrabel's kind of being hung out to dry a little bit. I wonder if if maybe he's told teams to where it's like, you know what, hey, I'm actually going to go ahead and take the year off a little bit and just kind of reset this, the self, mind wise a little bit. And I say that in the sense of, because obviously Bronco fans have been clamoring, for a new defensive coordinator. Possibly it's like, hey, if a coach actually tells you, hey, I'm just going to take the year off, reevaluate things, you got to honor it. Like you got to honor it. And so I think that, I'm curious to see how that whole, well, for your sake, where do you think the coaching stuff kind of even transpires a little bit?
Well, as far as Vrabel's concerned, it's really interesting to me because there were all those rumors initially when he was first dismissed by Tennessee that New England was going to be the destination. And then obviously they had the succession plan already written into the contract of both Bill Belichick and Gerard Mayo. So it felt like the Patriots already had their guy singled out long before this even happened. With Vrabel, it's like I was thinking about places where he could go. Maybe Atlanta if the Bill Belichick and Jim Harbaugh stuff doesn't work out, but it feels like Atlanta is going to land one of those 2. Other than that, it feels like Seattle's probably going to go Dan Quinn. Maybe
That's
the
funny.
Commanders. Yeah, that would be funny, but I could very easily see it happening too, just because of all that history there. But I'm thinking maybe, the Commanders for Mike Vrabel, that could be a good spot.
Yeah. It seems like
maybe he's going to take a year off.
Yeah, and it seems like former coach Ron Rivera landed on his feet down there with the Philadelphia Eagles in what's been transpiring there. Yeah, I'm curious to see if the Commanders go a young coach down there. Probably go out and get a Ben Johnson if they don't get a veteran coach. And especially, I'd imagine with Ron Rivera being there a decent amount, you probably would want to go with a young quarterback. My surprise, and it's one of the reasons why I kind of was wondering, with Bill Belichick or even a Pete Carroll or even, some of those other guys, is like you do still have upgrades. And I know we mentioned about the Bills, earlier, but it's like you have great coaching upgrades down there, right? You have great coaching upgrades down there. And with a new ownership group, which came in second, obviously, to the Broncos, they're still pouring a lot of resources into that team. And I would not be surprised the way this thing even prolongs to where you're starting to talk about, is Jim Harbaugh going to be taking an interview with the Washington Commanders? I mean, like, he'll be close to his brother. He'll be on the opposite conference. It's a decent enough situation possibly for him, and with how the way that Washington player personnel wise has at least built their teams over the years, defensive heavy, really relies solely on decent enough running game and maybe less a little bit on the quarterback, if you will. I can certainly see it. So I'm really curious to see, what Washington will certainly do. I think it's Ben Johnson though. Like I think it's Ben Johnson. I think that they go with Ben Johnson. Atlanta, I'm still going to say Belichick. That's kind of like what it's feeling right now. So I'll still say Belichick. Yeah. So I I'm really curious to see how it all shakes out, and I hope that Jim Harbaugh stays away from the AFC West, and in particular, of course, the Los Angeles Chargers, and of course, too, with the AFC West, the Raiders finally made their decision. And Broncos fans, please humor us. We are going to give praise to a team that is in the AFC West. We've been, giving them so much hate and crap for years, but they finally did the right thing. They did the right thing. They did not Rick Bisaccia this situation. They made the right call in keeping Antonio Pierce.
They did. 100%. You can see that he resonates with the locker room. The guys respect him. They respect what he's done to build the culture in that locker room. So this just felt like a no-brainer, man. There's some X's and O's stuff they're going to have to work out. I believe they were interviewing some outside offensive coordinator candidates, which kind of surprises me because I felt that Bo Hardigree, their interim offensive coordinator, did a pretty good job for them in that role. So there are some of those X's and O's stuff that they're going to have to figure out. But just in terms of Antonio Pierce being like that CEO and that locker room leader, this was the perfect hire. It was a no-brainer. They did it the right way. They followed the Rooney Rule. They interviewed 2 external minority candidates, and those were the only 2 candidates that they interviewed. So that signaled that Mark Davis was always going to hire Antonio Pierce. This was something that he knew he had to do. He couldn't fumble it like he did with Rich Bisaccia, and good on them, man. Will it work out for them long-term? That remains to be seen, but it felt like this was the move that had to happen there in Vegas.
Yeah, and obviously the fairest comment that you can make is, does this help them out long-term? We don't know that answer, but as far as the right now, the right call was for them to hold on to Antonio Pierce. With the way that team was playing, they were playing hard for him, and very subtly, you don't want to lose Max Crosby. when you get that kind of endorsement, I want to be traded if you don't if you don't hire Antonio Pierce. Certainly a situation that would bear watching. So yeah, I'm curious to see how it all shakes out. Of course, with Vegas, maybe they'll go quarterback there. Down there, they do have Aiden O'Connell. They've got a quarterback situation certainly maybe to figure out. But I'm really curious, and I'm really excited to see how this whole head coaching carousel take shape. But as we finish up the show here, Gage, is there any other final thoughts?
I think we're good, man. I think we pretty much covered all the bases. We didn't cover the Carolina Panthers coaching spot. That's the one job we kind of subtly left. It's like, who wants that job? Who wants to work under David Tepper?
That's the reverse situation. So as much as we praise the fact of them going in-house of the Raiders, how crappy is it that they spent all this time interviewing external candidates, and they did interview the in-house candidate for general manager. They exhausted all of their search. I don't know how I feel about it. It just feels like you exhausted every single angle, really good candidates, but like it's to where it's like, you know what? We'll just give it to this guy. I believe it's Dan Morgan or something. Like, we'll give it to him, as our general manager. It's like, if I'm Dave Tepper and the way that my reputation is right now, I would actually prefer someone on the outside to come in and give me some fresh ideas, not someone who could possibly be, to use a phrase that's been rolled around a little bit with Broncos country in certain situations, a puppet. I don't want him to be a puppet.
But Dave Tepper is the smartest guy in the room. He'll be the first to tell you that.
It's true. And if you tell him different, he will splash beer in your face.
Yep, exactly. So this was always going to be what was going to happen in Carolina. He was going to get another puppet, and it's basically the right-hand man of his previous puppet. So there you go, man. It's incredible just how incompetent that organization is. And just before we wrap it up briefly, I've heard the argument against the Broncos trading up for a quarterback that, oh my God, what if we end up like Carolina where they're going to be so bad and then they don't have their first overall pick? The Broncos organizationally are nowhere even close to the rotten mess that the Carolina Panthers are from the top down, man. So that's just the final note I'll leave it on.
Not to mention, we have Sean Payton. He's a developer. Like I'm not worried about it one bit at all. For Gage, who is a host down there over at the Denver Broncos Syndicate, make sure you go check him out there over on YouTube. For myself, as a host, along with Gage on the 5280 podcast, make sure you follow over us on Twitter. Obviously, Glenn and Mike were unable to make it here tonight, but it was a great show nonetheless. We want to say thank you so much for joining us. We will have another episode next week on Tuesday at that same time, same bat channel at 6 o'clock Mountain Time on the MHRT Network. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, like us, and love us. We want to say thank you so much, and we will see you next week.
Fast lane when I pass in the street, bag of money in the passenger seat. Tempo's been asking for me on the road from the west to the east. Way up, I might never come down, cause the coast's racking up the flight miles. So high, I might never come down, so what?